Hi, this is Hilton Giesener welcoming you to episode 3 of TheMossShow. In this interview, we sit down with Rory Headon, an expert at Microsoft South Africa, on Microsoft's various search products and strategies. We'll be touching on various points in the broader Microsoft search landscape and looking also specifically at where these tie into the SharePoint products. So, let's jump straight into that interview.
I was proud and I was standing. I was lost in a crowd, but now this room is abandoned. Everybody keep on fading out. I was strong like a lion. I was firm.
I'm sending this episode with Rory Headon from Microsoft South Africa, who's an expert on the search-related products, both in SharePoint, but in the wider enterprise as well. Rory's been with Microsoft since July of 2006 after an 8-year career with IBM in the UK. He has a long history of technical and pre-sales experience in the business productivity domain, and he helps his customers in the financial services and communication industries map where Microsoft technology can enable business goals or pain. Rory is also the enterprise search lead for the enterprise and partner group here in Microsoft South Africa. And his role is primarily about communicating the Microsoft search strategy internally and externally with partners and customers, as well as ensuring Microsoft wins against the competition. That's quite a bio, Rory. Let's maybe talk about some of what that means and some of what the search products are, particularly with a focus around the SharePoint space.
Okay, well, thanks for having me on this webcast. I'm very excited to tell you and the listeners about the Microsoft search strategy. You mentioned that that's quite a bio. I see as the search piece being one of the pieces in my job that gives me lots of energy. I enjoy competing against the likes of the big enterprise search players, and I think Microsoft has got a really, really strong value proposition and offering that we take to market. Just some, high-level information about what Microsoft is thinking about search and, how serious we are about it. I think if any Martian landed on planet Earth and came to someone at Microsoft and said, tell me about Microsoft and tell me about competition, one of the things that Martian would certainly hear is that one of the very top, if not number one, competitive priorities for Microsoft is in the search space. So, search is a very, very important strategic compete initiative for ourselves, and we're investing lots and lots of money and resource to make sure that we take a really strong value proposition to our customers. And to help you understand that a little bit, one of the kind of top level things that have happened in the last couple of years is the acquisition of Fast. For those who haven't heard about Fast before, if you go and have a look at any of the leading reviews of enterprise search or actually information access, you'll see that Fast has always been one of the strongest and most capable vendors in the information access industry or enterprise search industry. And so, what happened about a year and a half ago is Microsoft was going down its path with its enterprise search strategy, and we very sort of quickly came to the realization that we need some additional thought leadership and assistance with how our search strategy plays out and how we address the particular customer pains that customers are telling us about. And so something that was very unlikely to happen actually happened, and that is that Microsoft acquired a company that does not fit the traditional Microsoft acquisition target, in the sense that Fast is a technology that's traditionally based on some old Corba code and very much aligned with Java, although of course there is .NET code that will run in the Fast platform as well. But traditionally very much a Unix aligned kind of technology set. And that kind of leads me into the point here that this is one of the acquisitions where Microsoft has gone ahead and acquired the company more specifically to bring those people and that thought leadership that the Fast company had into Microsoft. And you'll see that before the Fast acquisition, Microsoft had 80 people on the development team, on the enterprise search development team. We now have over 500, nearly 600 people developing our search solutions, and that's in most part down to the acquisition of Fast. So that acquisition cost Microsoft $1.2 billion. So, needless to say, it's a massive investment that we've made in our search strategy, and I hope that goes a long way in helping, you and the people listening to this see just how serious Microsoft is about enterprise search and about becoming a leader in the space.
Yeah, I think they've definitely shown with this and similar moves in the Office stack and around the Moss product, but outside of it as well, the commitment to search and the importance that it represents to them. But it's also tricky to understand the difference between the internet search experience and the enterprise search experience. You've got a great article on this on your blog on the informationworker.co.za site. Can you talk us through what your thoughts on that are, what makes internet search not the same as enterprise search, and what the challenges are in the enterprise?
Okay. So, look, and this is something people that have heard me speak about search before will have heard time and time again. And I think it's really important to distinguish between internet search and enterprise search, or another way of putting it is internet search versus intranet search. But essentially what happens with any of us is you say the word search and one particular name comes to mind. And really what's really important here is to point out that what works for the internet does not work for the enterprise. So let's go and explore those a little bit. So the way I try and explain this is in three very distinct buckets of challenges, if I can put it like that. So the first one really addresses the IT challenges. And the second one addresses the data and expertise challenges, and really one of the key areas that differentiates Microsoft. And then finally, the third bucket really is focused on addressing what the user challenges are about search. So if we start with the enterprise side of things, or at least the IT side of things, in other words, what people in IT are battling with.
So you're talking about the operations teams here, or developers?
Well, it's primarily about the operations side of things and how the solutions get architected and all of that. So let's go and explore that. One of the things, and probably the most important differences between internet search and intranet search or enterprise search, is the concept of relevance and ranking. And you will have seen on my blog entry, I put a little bit of effort into articulating this. And essentially what I'm saying is, the way that the internet search engines go out and index all the world's information and store that content in its own proprietary index does not work for the enterprise, simply because of the way that the ranking and relevance algorithms work. And so to give you a practical example, if you have a look at how the internet search engines work, they go out and index anonymous information. And one of the very heavy weightings that's applied in the algorithm is focused on how many times a piece of content is linked to and from that particular article or that particular piece of content. So to give you a practical example, if Rory were to go and write an article on the future of the political situation in South Africa, and Hilton were to go and write an article on the political situation and future in South Africa, regardless of whose information is factually correct, the person that is seen to be the most popular on the internet will be the one that ranks higher in the results set. And that popularity is based on, for example, what kind of followership you have on your blog. So let's say you've got 100,000 people that follow your blog and I've only got 10,000 that follow my blog. Your article is going to come up higher in the ranking than mine is. Even though, you might find that your document is completely incorrect and mine is correct. None of that applies, because all we're looking at is how many times the document is linked to and from, as far as the index graph is concerned. And so that brings the point that in the enterprise, when people are creating content and trying to share ideas with each other and impart information to other people in the organization, they aren't designing the content with the intent for it to be found. So in other words, when I'm working in Word or whatever business productivity application I use, and I'm getting my idea from my brain into a physical document, I'm not linking that piece of content to 500 things on the internet and perhaps 3 other links on a SharePoint site or on a Documentum site or whatever it is. What I'm focusing on doing is just getting my idea out there.
So you may have, for example, one key link to a specific policy and procedure, and it only appears on the intranet front page. The fact that it appears right on the front page means it's in people's mind the correct link, but it's only got one rank towards it, so it wouldn't necessarily come up most highly.
Yes, exactly. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the way that the ranking and relevance engine works is fundamentally different. And the other thing is this idea of buying a little black box and putting it in the corner, if I can use that analogy. That black box approach, that black box idea for enterprise search does not work. And the best way I like to think about this is the IT department needs to treat the search service, the search service as far as the enterprise is concerned. They need to treat that as a garden. So what I'm saying there is, with your garden, when you first move into your home or when you first build your home, you're going to get this garden put in. But it doesn't stop there. You then go and every weekend, trim the rose bushes, put some fertilizer, cut the grass, maybe go and cut some new hedges, etc., etc. And so the point is that maintenance of your garden is an ongoing thing. It happens all the time. And the same is true for enterprise search. It's something that needs to be looked after and something that needs to be tuned on an ongoing basis because the truth is, in any given organization, information is changing all the time. What people are looking for might be changing all the time. So if you take Microsoft as an example, 5 years ago, we were probably focused more on, looking for Windows Vista kind of information, where at the moment, people are maybe looking more for software plus services kind of information. And so the search engine that we run internally is looked after to make sure that the people, when they're looking for stuff, they find what they're looking for, and that's based on making sure that the tuning is set correctly. So it's an ongoing thing. It's not something you leave in the corner and never go back to. It's not a set and forget kind of scenario.
So how do the Microsoft tools facilitate this?
Well, so that's a bit of a loaded question, and I say that because today we come to market with 3 very distinct offerings, and the analysts in the market kind of mark against us for having 3 distinct offerings. But our fundamental belief is that businesses around the world aren't all at the same level of maturity as far as enterprise search is concerned. And I can certainly speak from experience based on the South African market. I'll talk to one bank and they will be very advanced in their thinking around search. And I'll go and talk to one of their main competitors and they haven't even started thinking about search. And so that presents a challenge as far as the technology is concerned because this one-size-fits-all kind of thinking doesn't really apply. And so the way that we address the market is we say, look, for customers that haven't started thinking about search, how about starting your journey with a very entry-level kind of solution where you can play around with it, it doesn't cost you any money, and you can start looking at how the search solution gives you value. I'm going to skip the middle piece because I'm sure we'll come back to the offering in a moment, but then our high-end search is really very expensive but also very capable platform, and that platform is really very capable of helping customers actually make money from people doing searches, and that's typically the kind of scenario where you might have a company that has their presence on the internet that is very important to them, and so they will drive money through how people do searches on their sites. So you can go from a very basic let's discover search all the way through to let's actually build a business on top of the search engine, and we offer that broad spectrum of capability through the Microsoft product portfolio.
Can you name those 3 products and also tie them into Moss particularly?
Okay, so the entry-level product, we actually have 2 sort of offerings in the entry-level area. The first one is Microsoft Search Server Express. If you go to microsoft.com/enterprise search, you'll find information about it. But the key thing to point out about Search Server Express is that it's free to download. We don't expect anybody to pay for it. It's something that you implement on top of Windows Server. But the point is that this is for discovering what search is about. It's not a scalable solution. It's not designed or intended to be the enterprise search service. It's purely about letting customers discover or allowing and encouraging customers to discover what search can do for their business. In that same capability bucket, there is also something called Microsoft Search Server 2008, which is fundamentally the same product, except this one is something that customers pay for, and it's also something that is scalable in the sense that you can have multiple servers in a cluster, which obviously allows for much better performance and a much larger corpus that can be indexed. But that is still what we refer to as entry-level search. Then moving up the stack, we also, in the middle tier, we have what we refer to as infrastructure search or an infrastructure service. And really the thinking there is, if a business is serious about providing a business productivity infrastructure for their staff to be productive, then, as far as the way Microsoft thinks about it, there are 5 very key capabilities that need to be catered for in a business productivity infrastructure. And that covers collaboration, enterprise content management, business intelligence, communication, and then enterprise search. And so, the reason why we call it an infrastructure service is because the business productivity infrastructure should be an integrated platform that is allowing people to move seamlessly from one capability to the next. So if I can give you a scenario where you've got an information worker that is doing research on a business case that they're preparing for some kind of strategic future for the business, for their own business, you'll find that in that exercise of doing research, they will be spanning across communication, in other words, having synchronous real-time communication with people. They'll be going and looking in their enterprise content management system for, studies that have been done in the past, or, any kind of white papers or that kind of stuff. They'll be collaborating with people on ideas that they might have. And as part of that experience, they'll also actually be doing search. So if you think about ECM, it depends on what kind of individual you are, but you get 2 kinds. One will go and browse by following links to find stuff, and another will actually not waste the time doing that, and they'll just go straight to the search engine and search for content. And so the point here is, the BPI, or the business productivity infrastructure, needs to cater for all of those capabilities, not just exclusively ECM or exclusively collaboration. And so if a customer is thinking about search in that context, in the context of it being an infrastructure service, then it makes a lot of sense to have that service be part of the rest of the Microsoft platform. And so in the infrastructure service and in the entry-level service, those 2 technologies are fundamentally catered for by SharePoint. So the Search Server Express and Search Server 2008 offering are they're not quite SharePoint servers, but the technology base is SharePoint. Although it's been restricted to just providing the search capability and not the other capabilities that I'm sure our listeners are familiar with as far as SharePoint is concerned. The infrastructure service, or the infrastructure search, is actually SharePoint. It's literally Office SharePoint Server 2007. And for those administrators or techies that have gone and deployed SharePoint before, you'll be familiar that when you're doing the configuration, you have the ability to go and configure search, configure the information sets that it connects to, and also go and do the fine-tuning on how the ranking works and best bets and thesauruses and all of these kinds of things. So search is definitely a component of SharePoint that should be enabled when you're going through the architecture and design scenarios.
So would it be fair to say, for example, that the first product that you spoke about, the Express version of the search, would tie well with, for example, a WSS infrastructure, whereas the enterprise infrastructure search is, as you say, part of the Moss search already, and it just depends on how you configure it and what settings you open up.
So Search Server and Search Server Express are not WSS. Windows SharePoint Services is fundamentally about providing very basic file management and document management capabilities. Search Server is in no way aligned with the WSS capability. This is just purely a search capability that uses some of the SharePoint code, a subset of the SharePoint code. SharePoint Server 2007, however, as you know, sits on top of WSS, and this is the platform that provides that infrastructure search. And what's really important here is that, and we should go back to those challenges that we started discussing in a moment. But what's important here is that when we refer to enterprise search, it's not just about searching the Microsoft environment. It's actually being able to search the rest of the enterprise as well. Because as much as Microsoft would love every customer to only use Microsoft, I'm confident enough to say that we are all level-headed enough. I know we're all enthusiastic and everything, but level-headed enough to realize that there are other information silos, there are other systems out there in the enterprise that the search solution should connect to, and we'll come back to how that gets addressed in a moment. But before then, so we've spoken about the entry-level search, and we've spoken about an infrastructure search. The third component, and this is really our high-end offering, is what we refer to as Fast ESP, or Fast Enterprise Search Platform. Now, this is the technology set that was acquired when we bought the Fast company. And if you think about Fast, you can really think about businesses building a revenue income on the search technology. And a really nice example that I like to talk about is careerbuilder.com. So this is a US-based job website where you can go and find job openings and then apply for them. This company was number 4 in the US job market before they implemented FAST. After they had implemented FAST, they moved from number 4 to number 1. And that was purely because of the experience that the search technology provided for people and the effectiveness of people finding jobs and actually applying for them using this search technology and the dialogue that the search technology starts encouraging with people. So you can think about, FAST as really, really high-end search offering that can be applied both for the intranet as well as the internet. So it's a very capable platform. What's really also very key about Fast ESP, and I've used this word a couple of times, is that it's a platform. And for the techies, the best way to explain this is you run setup.exe and you've got nothing. So in other words, you go and run the setup.exe for Fast, and when the setup is finished, that's when the work starts, because now you've got to get the user interface designed and you've also got to go and plug it into your information silos. Whereas with SharePoint, you go and run setup.exe, and yes, although there's some configuration to do, you're fundamentally kind of there. So there's a lot of capability that's accessible to you directly out of the box. So Fast is a very different animal, and it requires a lot of business analysis and a lot of implementation in order to start extracting that business value. When that starts happening, the business value is massive, and I think the Career Builder example articulates just how valuable this platform can be to how your competitive status is within your market.
And you would call then the Fast ESP as more going into the intranet side of things?
So Fast ESP is built and can be applied for both the internet and the intranet side of things. One of the things we'll talk about later is the futures and where we're going with Fast ESP. So let's park that, and I'll come back to it when we talk about the Microsoft platform for the future.
Okay, let's maybe come back to the headings that you had before. We were talking about ranking and relevance. And you've got some other important items here, things like security and scalability and management.
Yeah, that's right. So security is another very, very important factor for enterprise search. And, really what I'm saying there and what Microsoft is saying there is that these internet search engines go out and index all the world's information, but 99.9%, and, we can discuss and debate what percentages it is, but a vast majority of the content that the internet search engines go and index is anonymous. So, when you go to your favorite search engine like live.com and you go and do a search, the information you get back, you can click onto and directly get into that website in a matter of seconds. Now, that's fine for internet search, but in the enterprise, by definition, all content is secure. In other words, no content that is sitting in the enterprise should be accessible by someone that is not authenticated and that has access to the enterprise. And so this presents challenges, because if I get my search engine that doesn't understand and respect security models of Microsoft and non-Microsoft environments, what's going to happen is when a person, for example, goes and does a search for disciplinary hearing, they might get a list of results back, and in that list of results see a colleague's name. When I then click on that link to go and have a look at the document, it might then challenge me to log in. But hey, it's too late. I already know that person's been in a disciplinary hearing. And so, the point here is that for the enterprise, the search solution at index time and at query time needs to understand and respect the security models to ensure that when a result set is being presented, that result set is based on the access that the person executing the search has in the first place. So hide results of things that the person doesn't have access to.
And that trimming, as you say, needs to occur at 2 points, both during the crawling and later on during the presentation results as well.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's query time and index time. And, this is one of the things that presents challenges for IT, because if you try and do it at query time only, your search is going to take forever. And, this is one of the downfalls of one of our competitors, is that they do query time security trimming, which means that it takes forever. And that very same company is the one that set the expectation that results should be sub-second. And so it's a really interesting area of enterprise search that customers need to think about. On the flip side of it, something I've also found very interesting about the security aspect of enterprise search is how search can present a challenge for business, or for IT rather. And what I mean by that is, and what we've seen in one of the banks is, they implemented the search technology, and people in business were suddenly getting access to documents that they shouldn't have access to. And so, they came back to us and said, well, hey, what's going on here? I mean, how can your search engine isn't working. People are getting access to stuff that they shouldn't have access to. And through some investigation, we discovered that people were practicing the security by obscurity method, in quotes. And what that means is, you can have a file share with 16-level deep folder structure. And if you go and take a file and hide it 16 levels down, chances are somebody isn't going to find it because they just simply don't know to browse to that level of depth to get the document. And what search does is it takes away that complexity and that depth in folder structure. And so if someone has access to a document through the actual security model, then when they do a search, they're going to find it. And so, what I say is be sure that the security model is correct and in place and enforced before you go and apply search across that particular information silo, because you can be sure that users will find stuff, and if they don't have access to it, you better be sure that the access control is right in the first place.
That's actually a great link into another topic, because the disadvantage there, not only in the it not being real security, that example, is that while it may provide some very, very small measure of security to the people who shouldn't have access to the document, the people who should probably can't find it either. So I guess to some extent that links us into elements of both the structured and unstructured data discussion as well. In terms of things like hierarchy versus metadata.
Yeah, and so, just to close off on the IT challenges, we also talk about compliance and scalability and manageability and extensibility, and there's tons and tons of stuff that we can talk about. But, in the interest of time, to lead us into this next bucket of challenges, I'd like to talk about extensibility. And when I talk about extensibility, it's really across two areas. And the one is around the user experience and how the search experience can be much richer than it is today. And then the other side is around the IT side of things. How do you actually connect your search solution to other systems within the organization? So to start with the user experience, one of the fundamental beliefs here at Microsoft is that this notion of having a white page with blue links is really archaic. And what I mean by that is, think about the power that these PCs have, and think about how intelligent us human beings are. Now, how about using this technology and this intelligence we have to drive a much richer and a much more immersive search experience? And so for those listeners out there, when you've got some time, go to tafiti.com, that's TAFITI.com, and go and have a look at the kind of experiments that we're doing by combining Silverlight and our live search assets, combining those two assets together to drive a more rich kind of user experience. And so we're putting a lot of thought into that kind of area around how we drive much richer user experiences. Another example, again, I've referred to it earlier, is careerbuilder.com. Now go there and have a look at the kind of dialogue you have with the search engine. And so with this example, it's not a very pretty UI, but the dialogue is really powerful. And the example I like to use is if you go to a library and you ask the librarian to take you to the Jaguar section, that librarian isn't going to just drag you off into one of the hallways and land you at a bookcase and say, here you go. The first thing that person is going to ask is, do you mean the car or the animal? And then you'll say, well, actually, I'm interested in the car. And then the librarian will say, do you mean the saloon car, Formula One car, Le Mans? And you go, I'm actually interested in Formula One. And they go, okay, well, do you mean from post-2006 or, pre-2006? And you have a dialogue with the librarian. And what we're trying to do with these search technologies and what we're really trying to encourage is that same kind of dialogue when you're online. And so go to careerbuilder.com and do a search for, your role and see what happens when the search result comes back. You'll see in the middle of the screen there is a set of options that you can start using to refine your search. And so the extensibility area is really important to us. It's about making sure that the user experience is really rich and it drives a really immersive experience so that people are able to assimilate vast amounts of information very quickly. The second piece of extensibility is really on the IT side of things. And I've already mentioned it before. Microsoft is very much focused on making sure that the search solution can plug into our own stack, but also plug into other stacks. And other stacks include the very well-known ones like SAP and Siebel and Oracle and Documentum and Lotus Notes and FileNet. All of those well-known vendor products. But also we are cognizant of the fact that organizations also have their own bespoke systems that they've written themselves. And so what we've done with both the SharePoint and FAST platforms or environments is we've provided a framework to allow the IT pros to connect SharePoint or connect FAST into those other systems so that when the indexing is being done, it's able to understand which protocols to use, what the data model looks like, what the security model looks like, and understand that and respect it so that when a user is doing a search, the results that they bring back, the results that the search engine brings back is relevant based on the kind of information silo that it's doing a search on. And an example I like to use is here at Microsoft, we have at the moment, we're still using SharePoint for our enterprise search service. And when I do a search, I can set my scope to customer. And when I set my scope to customer and maybe execute a search for the South African Police Service, when it brings the results back, it's actually bringing a result set back that's sitting in Siebel. And so when I then click on the particular customer that I want based on that result set, it's then going and actually drawing me a composite view using the portal capabilities within SharePoint, but pulling that information directly from Siebel. And so it's really important to make sure that this search solution can be connected to other systems, not just Microsoft systems, because that's really where the value is for people in business. They don't care if the stuff is sitting in Siebel. They don't care if it's sitting in SharePoint. They're not bothered. All they want to do is get access to that content so that they can look at it and they can reach a decision or, use the content that they've found as part of their business case or, whatever it is, whatever piece of work it is that they're doing.
And if we tie that together with something we spoke about previously, obviously you'd still want the same level of search trimming applied to that as well.
Yes, 100%. And that's why, especially in the SharePoint world, you're probably familiar with the concept of a protocol handler and an iFilter. And so those two things are the very, very critical things that allow us to programmatically tell SharePoint how to go and connect into those systems. And then another component which is very important in this context is the business data catalog. And at Microsoft, we use the BDC to connect SharePoint to Siebel when we're doing searches for customers. So those three components, they are really very important components that allows us to connect to the non-Microsoft world and understand the data model, understand the security model, and then provide information back to users.
Rory, this is the first show we've done on search, so can we maybe talk about the iFilter component as well? We haven't unpacked that much.
Yeah, so look, I'm by no means a technical expert, so I will go to my level of depth that I can, and if we need to have more, then certainly let's arrange a follow-up article with one of our SharePoint specialists. But the main idea behind an iFilter is this is how we tell SharePoint as well as other components within the Microsoft stack to be able to understand a document or a data format. So as an example, when you implement SharePoint, there are a number of iFilters that are available out of the box. As an example, the iFilter for Word is something that's built into SharePoint. Customers quite often find that actually they want to go and index TIFFs, so that one's also available. But then you also get ones that aren't available, like, for example, the PDF iFilters. In other words, the iFilter that tells SharePoint how to understand and read PDF files. And that's something that you can, go and download for free, off a number of different websites. But the point is that this is the component that allows SharePoint to understand how to index a particular content type.
And there are filters for a variety of third-party file formats, like PDF and like audio files even.
Yeah, and if you go to Microsoft.com/enterprise search, you'll see that there's actually an iFilter pack that you can download and implement for free. So that's the iFilter. Then moving on to the next piece, the protocol handler is really about how you tell SharePoint to connect to and understand the information source that it's indexing. And so, for example, you might find that there's a protocol handler for SAP, a protocol handler for Siebel, etc., etc., etc. You can also think of the protocol handler as kind of like a connector. It's the way that you tell the technology to connect and understand the way that the other information silos in the organization work. Now, one last piece just in this data expertise and challenges is really, and this is something that is very, very important to us here at Microsoft, is the idea that, if you go on what analysts say, they reckon that up to 80% of information in any given organization is tacit, which means one of two things. One, it's either sitting on their laptop hard drives, which is not really useful to the rest of the enterprise because we can't go and look at other people's hard drives. But then also it means that it's probably sitting in their heads. And so if this is true, and we can debate whether it's 80% or 60% or whatever the percentage is, but the point is that there's information that is not sitting in the enterprise or in the corporate memory. And so how do we use technology to help people not only connect to information that we do know about, but also allow people to connect with other people? And so, you'll find that Microsoft Research has put a lot of time and effort and money into this particular problem. And you're going to find that in the SharePoint 14 timeframe, which is kind of happening around, early 2010, this is something that we're addressing very, very well. And it's how we allow people to do searches. But when the search result comes back, it brings back not only data or information sitting in the enterprise, but also people that might know something about that, that topic that you've done a search for. So people search is a very, very important piece of the Microsoft search strategy, and you'll see a lot of that come to fruition in the 14 timeframe.
But we do get some of that, as you say, with things like My Sites and integration with components within the SharePoint stack already.
Yeah, and then it's getting even stronger in the next release.
Rory, I know we're running low on time. Have we got a little bit of time to talk through some of the user challenges component as well?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges we've got, and I see for myself here as well, is that when people do searches, the problem is that they need to go and do searches across multiple silos. So, let me use myself an example. I've got typically 3 areas that I do a search for when I'm trying to find information, maybe even 4. So the first one is my personal hard drive, my laptop. I'd go and do a search there. Then I go and do a search on MSW, which is the Microsoft intranet. Then I go and do a search on Microsoft.com. And then probably I also go and do a search on Live.com, which as you know is the world's best search engine. I say that with a grin on my face. But the point is, there are 4 different tools that I use to go and find information. And for me, that's frustrating, right? I mean, why do I have to go to 4 different places to scope my search? Why can't I just click on the start button, do a search, and the results that come back come from, whichever information silos IT has defined, but then also you interleave the results so that the ranking and relevance is applied across all of those information silos, and then the results are interleaved with each other.
It's not just that you have to go to 4 sources, but each source has its own quirks and almost syntax of sorts.
Yeah. So, one of the areas that we're putting a lot of time and investment into is to drive that unified search experience. And with Windows 7, if you're using it yet, if you're not, kind of, get it, it's really cool. But one of the things we're focused on there is making sure that when I do, and something we've got running internally at Microsoft, is when I go and do a search now, the results that it brings me back on my desktop search is both content sitting on my local machine, which could be on my hard drive or in my chat transcripts or in Outlook or whatever the case may be, but it's also bringing back results that are sitting on MSW, which, as I've already mentioned, is the Microsoft intranet. And so, the point here is we're trying to unify the search experience so that, or at least unify the search results so that when people go and execute a search, it's bringing results back from many places, even though the user doesn't really know nor care where the information is sitting. And then I've already mentioned the kind of user experience, that rich, immersive experience, that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about extensibility. But this is focused on driving a really rich experience. And again, I'll refer to Tafiti and I'll refer to careerbuilder.com. And there's lots of others. And perhaps what we can do is, we can post some URLs for people to have a look at when they're accessing this webcast.
That'd be great. Rory, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I think you've unlocked a lot of interesting debate around the search capabilities. And I know I've certainly learned a lot around the concepts and the important pieces of this puzzle. So thanks again for sharing your time and your expertise.
All right, good. Thanks for having me. I'm very conscious that we didn't discuss everything we wanted to discuss. So, if you feel there's an appetite for it, let's have a follow-on discussion and go and explore some of the other areas that are really important. I mean, one thing I'd really like to share with you is the Microsoft search strategy, where we're going in the future, how we're going to address the product offerings in the 14 time frame and all of that. So, let's have a follow-on discussion.
Definitely, that'd be great.
Out the window, everybody keep on fading out. Gone out the window, everybody keep on fading out.
If you've got any questions about any of the ideas discussed in this episode, or you'd like to give other feedback, like show topics or requests, then mail us at feedback@TheMossShow.com. To access the archives of all of our shows, browse to www.themossShow.com or www.TheMossShow.com.